Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a brand new deck for you, and just as a quick heads up, this is not a budget deck, although I do think it should be fairly easy to find substitutes for those expensive cards. But before that, just a quick reminder to please click like and subscribe if you enjoy my videos. We're well on our way to 1 million subscribers, and every single click counts. And today's deck is going to be centered around Inti, Seneschal of the Sun. For 1 colorless and 1 red, it's a legendary creature, human knight 2/2, with whenever you attack, you may discard a card. When you do, put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature, it gains trample until end of turn. And whenever you discard 1 or more cards, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card until your next end step. So ever since I saw Inti, I thought it was amazing that red is getting such a source of card advantage in this set, and one that is very nicely costed as well at only 2 mana. So obviously the main thing that we're going to be building around is the second ability, where whenever we discard anything, we're going to exile the top card of our library, and we may play it until our next end step. That ability is super strong, and this deck is chock full of ways to discard cards for value, whether that be through cycling, through channeling, or just through creatures who do it anyway, and full of cards that have payoffs when you discard stuff, such as cards with madness, for example. It should be incredibly easy to churn through your deck with this, and Inti is actually quite an aggressive creature on his own, so growing your stuff and putting counters on them and giving them trample does actually mean that you can push through a nice little bit of damage, which will be great when we're trying to close off the game. So anyway, without further ado, let's get started, and we're starting off with Anger. Anger is basically an auto-include in this deck, seeing as it's so easy to pitch it into the graveyard with all the discarding we're doing. Angie's Ravager is great once we're running low on cards in hand, which we should often be with this deck. Getting to pitch our hand every turn means that we get to fill the graveyard, and we get to draw cards every time, which is solid. Of course, the madness is the main thing. We get to play this whenever it's discarded, meaning that we don't lose any card advantage by discarding. Bralin Skyshark Rider is one of the best cards in the deck because it's going to grow itself and deal damage to each opponent every time you discard a card, which is going to be happening a lot in this deck. Next up, we have Conspiracy Theorist. This is very solid because it fits in with the attacking theme of the deck, and it allows us to discard cards to draw cards, which is already good. But then the other clause it has means that we can basically exile any card we discard if we want to play it that turn, which is a great option to have. Containment Construct basically does the same thing as the second part of Conspiracy Theorist. It gives us a way to exile the cards we discard and play them that turn if we want to. Enterprising Scallywag is going to give us a treasure every turn if we descended, which is basically guaranteed in this deck. Felden of the Third Path can provide us some very nice value by reusing all these cards that we've dumped into our graveyard. Flaming Tyrannosaurus is a really sweet new card from the Doctor Who decks. It's going to be really good whenever we play anything from somewhere other than our hand, and that's something that we're going to be doing a lot in this deck with all of the cards we're playing from exile. Glinthorn Buccaneer is basically another version of Bralin Skyshark Rider. Iraxa, Empress of Mars, is very solid because, again, we're going to be playing a lot of cards from exile, and this having Battlecry actually is a great way for us to try to finish off the game. Jaxis the Troublemaker is a great discard outlet that is also going to provide us some card advantage and make for some very big swingy turns. Kami of Celebration fits so nicely in this deck. It's going to provide us even more card advantage, since whenever we attack with a modified creature, we're going to be able to play the top card of our library that turn, and then it's also going to self-fuel itself by putting counters on stuff whenever we play things from exile, which again we're doing a lot in this deck. Keeper of Secrets is going to deal damage to our opponents whenever we play anything from anywhere other than our hand. That's going to be triggering a lot with Inti. Lily of the Blade Reforged worked very well with Inti because he's going to be exiling the top card of our deck so often. Memory Worm is another great payoff for playing stuff from places other than our hand. It's going to grow itself, and it's going to make either our opponents discard a card, or we can target ourselves to just keep the ball rolling. And it can kind of go off pretty hard in this deck, seeing as we have such a low mana curve. Mishra Excavation Prodigy is a nice discard outlet that can give us a nice little mana boost once a turn. Oliphant is really good in this deck. It works very well with Felden, who can reanimate it from the graveyard, but also just being able to cycle for 1 to find a mountain is fantastic. Phoenix of Ash should be able to escape very frequently from this deck due to all of the discarding that we're going to be doing. Psychosis Crawler is going to work quite nicely because we do have a lot of looting effects in the deck, and actually we're going to be drawing quite a lot of cards in this deck, which means that this should be dealing a nice chunk of damage to our opponents. Quicksmith Genius is going to work very nicely with all of the artifacts we're playing. It's just a great way to trigger our commander. Rampaging War Mammoth is a card that we're almost always going to be playing for its cycling ability, which is going to be very solid by allowing us to destroy a bunch of artifacts. We can then reanimate it with stuff like Felden. Revolutionist is very strong. It can rebias an instant or sorcery, and having Madness synergizes well with the deck. Rummaging Goblin Goblin is one of the classic rummage effects in red. It's very nice that we can use this every turn. Squeak Goblin Nabob is one of the best cards we can discard because we get to do it turn after turn after turn without losing card advantage. Zubira Tulsidi Caravaneer is going to be very strong because we actually have a lot of cards with low power. We can make a bunch of them unblockable and then discard our hand to draw an absolute ton of cards. Surly Badgersaur is one of the best cards in the deck. It's going to grow itself, make treasures, or fight our opponent's creatures, all of which are really good. We obviously prefer the treasure one most of the time, but the removal one can be good if opponents have small pesky creatures that we want to deal with. Wild Magic Sorcerer is going to give us some nice cascade when we play stuff from exile, which we're going to be doing a lot. And Zerzoth can throw a little bit of chaos in the game. We don't care that much about discarding because we have lots of ways to either reuse the cards we've discarded or gain advantage from discarding them, but this should annoy our opponents quite a bit, and that's always a good place to be. Moving on to sorceries, we have Avacyn's Judgment. This is one of the ways we can deal a bunch of damage, and it's nice that it has Madness. Crackle with Power is one of our finishers of choice. I'm a bit concerned that this deck has ways to actually close out the game, so we want a couple of big finishers like this to make sure we do. Insurrection is another of the big finishers which can steal all of our opponent's creatures and swing for lethal. Shatter Skull Smashing can again deal the last few points of damage if the game is stalled out. We do want to have a little bit of reach. Moving on to instants, we have Cathartic Pyre, which is decent removal but is also particularly good in this deck because we also get to discard cards and draw cards with it. Delayed Blast Fireball is going to be very good because we have pretty high odds of exiling it with Inti, at which point we can just pay it for 3 mana and get the full value for only half the price. Fiery Temper is decent removal that has Madness, as is Violent Eruption. And moving on to enchantments, we have Bitter Reunion, which synergizes very well with the theme of the deck. Fable of the Mirror Breaker is a great card, and in this deck, the discard chapter, which is probably the weakest one normally, is actually very good as well. Passionate Archaeologist is a great way to be throwing some damage towards our opponents. Tectonic Reformation is super solid because it has cycling on its own, and then we can also just cycle away any lands we have, which is really great with Inti. Underworld Breach is a great way to try to finish the game by reusing some of our finisher cards, and Vicious Shadows is there just in case we need an extra finisher. This can put our opponent in a very awkward position towards the end of the game if they're quite low because they can't afford to block our small creatures without killing them and tanking a bunch of damage. Moving on to artifacts, we have Brass's Tunnel Grinder. This is really solid because it discards and draws when it first comes in, and then it's going to be very easy to descend 3 times and transform it into a land that is going to let us discover every turn, and discover still works very well with what our deck is doing. Hazoret's Monument is a great card in most red decks, and it's better than usual in this one since we're built around discarding. Key to the City is similarly better than usual in this deck because making our stuff unblockable is always good, but it's particularly good when we actually synergize with the cost. Matsalantli, the Great Door, should be fairly easy to transform seeing as we have quite a few permanent types including planeswalkers and battles, and once we flip it, it's going to give us an absolute mountain of mana. Network Terminal is going to allow us to do a little bit more looting by tapping it and another artifact, and it also doubles as a mana rock. And moving on to battles, we have Invasion of Kaldheim, which is pretty good on the front side, but we really want it for the back side where it's going to allow us to discard stuff to impulse draw, which works super well with Inti. Invasion of Mercadia we want mostly for the front side because it's a nice looting effect. And moving on to Planeswalkers, we have Daretti Scrap Saband. This is going to work super nicely by allowing us to rebuy artifacts from our graveyard, but it also has a +2 ability that involves discarding, so it fits very well. And Tybalt the Fiend Blooded is there a little bit as a meme. If you're too scared of the random discard, then don't play this guy, but I think it's fine in this deck. A 2-mana Planeswalker is pretty sweet, and I can't really turn my nose down on good old Tybalt. And moving on to lands, we have Ash Barrens, which discards itself for just 1 mana. That's perfect in this deck. Gaia Reach Sanitarium is going to be very good with all the discard synergy we're running. So Kenzen Crucible of Defiance discards itself for a little bit of value. And Valakut the Molten Pinnacle is there as another way to try to finish off the game by dealing some damage with our lands. So there you have it. That has been our Inti Seneschal of the Sun deck tech. I think it's a really interesting deck that has a lot of different angles of attack and should be very difficult for your opponents to effectively shut down because you're drawing so many cards. It has a lot of potential and it can probably definitely be tweaked a little bit more, so do let me know what you think. What cards do you think I missed and what cards do you think I shouldn't have included? Let me know in the comment section below. I read all comments and respond to all of them too. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. It really helps the channel. And until next time, take care.